Madam Speaker, it's a privilege to be standing here today representing the 31st Legislative District here at the eve of the first day of the 2024 legislative session. And it's an honor to have been elected at the end of last session as the House Republican Leader. And when I look at these 40 members over on this side of the aisle that serve in my caucus, I'm so proud to have the opportunity to lead them. They are a group of very dedicated, very hardworking, very well-meaning individuals who show up for this job and plan to be here for the next 60 days, taking time away from their family and friends and community and jobs because they believe in the potential that our state has. Some of that potential you alluded to as well. And make no mistake, Washington has a lot of potential. We have abundant natural resources. We have seemingly limitless economic and financial capital, and even more human capital. But despite everything Washington has going for it, Madam Speaker, I'm afraid that we are confronting a catalog of crises here in Washington state. In too many ways, the state seems to be going in the wrong direction. We have the fourth highest homeless rate in the state. We have at one point last year, had the highest price of gas of any state in the country, and Seattle has the 9th most expensive cost of living of any city in the country. We have the fourth highest combined sales tax rate in the state. We set a new record for violent crime in 2023 and are number 2 in the country for property crime. We're the 4th most expensive state to buy a home. As I think you acknowledged, we saw the largest increase in fentanyl deaths of any country in the state last year. According to the ranking I saw, we are 35th in the country in terms of business climate, down from 15th just 2 years ago. And 70% of our students are failing math standards, while 50% are failing reading standards. Madam Speaker, we think it's time for a change. We think it's time that we need to fix Washington. And it's not just me saying that, and it's not just these 40 House Republicans on this side of the aisle. The issues that I listed just now are exactly the same ones, in the same order, that respondents in last week's Crosscut Elway poll said were the most important issues the legislature has to confront this session. Homelessness, cost of living, taxes, crime, housing, drugs, the economy, and education. We must fix these crises. We must fix Washington. I recognize it's easy for a minority caucus to stand up here and do nothing more than criticize the majority's solution. Tautologically speaking, you don't actually need the minority's votes to pass, to be part of the governing majority. But, Madam Speaker, House Republicans here in Washington want to help resolve the numerous crises facing our state. Most of our constituents don't care if something is a Democratic idea or a Republican idea. They just want good ideas. And so I'm here today on day one to share just a few of the very meaningful, constructive policy solutions that members of my caucus hope to be considered during this next 60-day session. We must fix the public safety crisis. Over the past 5 years, criminal activity has exploded in Washington. Homicide is up 96% since 2019. We rank number 3 for automobile theft, number 2 for property crime, and number 1 for retail theft of all states in the country. 61% of violent crime in Washington now goes unsolved. And that's perhaps not surprising considering that we rank 51st behind every state and the District of Columbia in police officers per capita. We need to provide recruitment and retention bonuses to local law enforcement agencies to improve both manpower and morale. We should toughen penalties for concealment and organized retail theft, 2 topics that Representative Griffey has been working on for years, so that law enforcement has the tools to go after property crime. And most importantly, we should bring to the floor House Bill 1363, which has dozens of co-sponsors between both of our caucuses, that would reinstate the vehicular pursuit laws so that police can track down and catch the perpetrators of these crimes. Drugs, as you mentioned and I mentioned, Madam Speaker, are a scourge on our community. Tragically, Washington's at the epicenter of the fentanyl crisis. Like I said, Washington State has seen the highest increase in fentanyl deaths of any state in the country in 2023. The amount of fentanyl seized by the DEA has increased 1,670% since 2019. Opioid deaths since then in Washington State have more than doubled. And while many House Republicans joined with you and most folks in your caucus last session voting for a landmark drug possession law, that legislation is aimed at individual drug users, many of whom are suffering from substance use disorder. But just because we increasingly recognize that drug use is a health issue more so than a criminal one, surely we can recognize that the manufacture and distribution of these deadly drugs, the people who do that do not deserve the same open hand. Representative Mossbrecher has introduced legislation that would enhance the penalties for fentanyl distribution to reduce the flow of illegal drugs in our community. Representative Maycumber is working on a bill to create a Bureau of Narcotics within the Washington State Patrol to fight sophisticated drug trafficking rings that operate across local government jurisdictional boundaries. And Representative Graham has a bill that would make it a crime to expose children and vulnerable adults to fentanyl and other controlled substances. It's not just drugs and public safety that are a concern, Madam Speaker, but so is the affordability of Washington. High taxes and burdensome regulations have driven up the cost of living for middle-class families. Housing and transportation cost 30% more in Washington State than the national average. We have the fourth highest combined sales tax rate, which I need not remind you most disproportionately affects low-income working Washingtonians. And thanks to the Climate Commitment Act, Washington drivers now pay the third highest gas price of any state in the country. So Representative Connors has a bill that would provide some of the CCA surplus revenue as rebates to Washington drivers to offset the high price of gas they paid last year. Washington State also remains one of the only states in the entire country to have not passed broad-based tax relief since COVID. And this will be the first and hopefully last time, Madam Speaker, I implore you to follow the lead of states like California and New York, but I hope that we follow their lead and pass broad-based tax relief. Representative Orcutt has a bill to create a 0.5% sales tax reduction, which will primarily benefit lower-class families. It's not just gas and food that is becoming unaffordable here in Washington, Madam Speaker. It's no secret that housing is unaffordable as well, and I think you alluded to that yourself. Thanks to, in my opinion, years of irrational land use policy and costly building regulation, Washington has the fewest number of housing units per household of any state in the country, according to the Lieutenant Governor's own study. We rank as the fourth most expensive state to buy a home. 88% of families can no longer afford a median-priced home in Washington State, and half of all renters end up paying more than a third of their monthly income in rent. As housing costs go up, housing becomes unattainable for many individuals, which further fuels the homelessness crisis. We now have the fourth highest homelessness population of any state in the country, which grew at an unprecedented 11% rate last year. So while we work our way out of this homeless and housing crisis by building more housing, we must, in the meantime, require that cities and counties clean up the encampments that create dangerous public health conditions near schools, parks, playgrounds, childcare centers, and give them the tools to do so. But we must also increase the supply of housing to avoid this crisis in the first place. To that end, Representative Cheney has introduced legislation that would incentivize landlords to voluntarily lower or freeze rents to create a more stable and affordable housing stock through a new tax credit program. Representative Connors has a bill to provide down payment assistance to nurses, firefighters, police, child care workers, and other critical professions to make sure that they're able to move to our state and afford a home. And Representative Jacobson, has introduced a bill drawn from her experience on the Puyallup City Council that would authorize cities and counties to create a streamlined permit process to make it more easy to build affordable housing in communities that so desperately need it. Madam Speaker, I also want to talk a little bit about kids. I have 4 kids of my own. 2 of them are in Auburn Public Schools, and 2 more will be there in a few more years. But despite over 50% of our state budget going to K-12 education, academic performance is plummeting. Again, according to OSPI's own report card, 70% of our students are failing to meet reading standards, 70% are failing to meet math standards, 50% are failing to meet reading standards. And tragically, those test scores are even lower for low-income and students of color who have fallen further behind their peers following the school closures. Over the past few years, public schools have lost 60,000 students, which suggests that a number of Washington families are not satisfied with the education they're receiving. Representative Rood, I'm proud to share, is working on legislation that would put tutors in every school and fund more paraeducators to provide high-dosage tutoring to get our kids back on track. Representative Corey has proposed a bill to fund literacy coaches in elementary school, prioritizing low-income students and those that have fallen furthest behind their peers, because we know that third grade reading ability is often a leading indicator of later academic success or failure. Last session, this body passed a bill from Representative McIntyre that would have created a new grant program to help school districts in economically disadvantaged areas build new schools, because all kids, regardless of their zip code, regardless of their area, deserve access to a world-class education system. We should pass that bill again this session. And we should not be so vain, Madam Speaker, as to insist that public schools are the only environment worthy of our support. No, nor should we be so vacuous as to believe that supporting one student's needs in one area means depriving other students of their needs in different areas. Representative Etzlick has introduced a bill that would fund education savings account for students who are low income, eligible for special education, or live in persistently failing school districts, so that all children can exercise the privilege of attending private school or homeschool, not just those who can afford it. And lastly, Madam Speaker, I will share another point that you alluded to as well, and that is the need to fix our child care crisis. After a decade of excessive regulations, Washington's child care system is broken. There's massive child care deserts across our state. 63% of children under 5 don't have access to child care, and even the families that can find it are often unable to afford it. Many of our members are proud to sponsor House Bill 1716, which would provide a B&O tax credit for businesses who voluntarily provide child care assistance to employees. Representative Chambers is developing a proposal to extend paid family leave benefits to new moms. And Representatives Couture and Jacobson have bills that would relax regulatory, licensing, and zoning requirements for providers in child care deserts to ensure that children have access to care and a place to go. Now, Madam Speaker, as you did, I recognize that this is an ambitious agenda, especially in a short supplemental session. And even if we could all agree on the symptoms, much less the treatment, it would still be difficult to comprehensively address these problems over the next 60 days. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. To paraphrase President Kennedy, we should seek solutions to these issues not because they are easy, but because they are hard. So over the next 60 days, Madam Speaker, I hope that we have the honesty to admit when we are wrong and the humility to be willing to try new approaches. And meanwhile, we must avoid the hubris to think that good intentions are a sufficient condition for good policies. So I'll end where I began. Washington State is full of potential, and none of us would be here if we didn't think we could help. But there's a catalog of crises confronting our great state. It's time for a change, Madam Speaker. Let's fix Washington.